The soft chime signaling the completion of boarding was a promise of luxury of seamless service of the quiet elegance that Skyline Airways flight SL-350 from JFK to London was known for. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished wood accents and cream leather seats, a carefully constructed bubble of tranquility designed to insulate its high-paying customers from the chaos of air travel. "You'll have to wait for beverage service like everyone else," Angela Wilson said, her voice clipped as she deliberately avoided making eye contact with the man in seat 3A. Dominic Foster settled into his pod, the spacious seat a welcome comfort after a whirlwind week of meetings in New York. He wasn't a man who typically chose first class for personal travel. He found it pretentious, a world away from the C-130s he'd piloted in the Air Force. But this flight was different. This was business. Or rather, it was reconnaissance. 3 days ago, the board of Skyline Airways had officially and very quietly named him as the successor to their retiring CEO, Gerald Thompson. The announcement wouldn't be public for another week. This flight was Dominic's idea, a secret shopper mission to see his new company from the perspective of a customer before the executive suite insulated him forever. He briefly wondered if this approach was too deceptive. "Am I crossing an ethical line here?" he thought, before reassuring himself. "No, this is about honest assessment. I need to see the real airline, not the performance they'd put on if they knew who I was." To ensure an authentic experience, he had booked under his own name but used a personal credit card and dressed down in a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits surrounding him. He wanted to see the airline not as a CEO but as a passenger, as a black man in casual clothes. He had a strong suspicion the experience might be different. The flight attendants began their pre-departure service. Madison Lopez, a young woman with warm eyes and a genuine smile, warmly greeted the passenger in 2B, a portly man in a custom suit. "Mr. Taylor, wonderful to have you with us again. Would you care for champagne before takeoff?" William Taylor, a senior investment banker and frequent flyer, accepted with a practiced nod. Then came Angela Wilson. She moved through the cabin with an air of ownership, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. She was in her late 40s, with a face that had once been beautiful, but was now hardened by years of forced smiles and a simmering resentment that seemed to radiate from her. 10 years ago, Angela had been considered a rising star at Skyline. She'd been shortlisted for senior cabin positions 3 times, always to be passed over for someone with a fresher perspective. After the 3rd rejection, something in her had changed. The eager-to-please flight attendant had hardened into a woman who protected her status ruthlessly. She'd seen how airlines discarded aging flight attendants, and she was determined not to be among them. She offered pre-departure champagne to Alexandra Grant in 3C, a fashion executive dripping in understated diamonds, and to the couple in row 4 laughing together over a financial newspaper. She moved past Dominic's seat as if it were empty. He made eye contact, a polite smile on his face, but her gaze slid over him, a phenomenon he was all too familiar with. It was a specific kind of blindness, one that chose its subjects. He waited a moment, assuming it was a simple oversight. When she passed him again on her way back to the galley, he politely raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and even. Angela stopped, her body angled away from him as if she were already in the middle of her next task. She didn't fully turn. "Yes." The word was clipped. "I think I was missed. I'd love a glass of water, please. No ice." She gave him a quick, dismissive glance. Her eyes lingered on his hoodie for a fraction of a second too long. "We'll begin our full beverage service once we're in the air. You can wait." She turned and disappeared into the galley without another word. Dominic blinked slowly, deliberately. It had begun. He settled back into his seat, pulling a worn paperback from his carry-on. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was observing. He was collecting data. Across the aisle, Edward Bennett, a tech executive in his 50s, had observed the interaction. First time in first class, he asked Dominic with a hint of condescension, No, Dominic replied, simply not elaborating. Well, some of the crew can be a bit selective with their attention, Edward said, lowering his voice. Don't take it personally. It's just how it is. Dominic studied the man's face. Here was someone accepting of the status quo, perhaps even benefiting from it. Another data point. Madison approached him a minute later, her expression apologetic. She couldn't have been more than 24 with earnest eyes that betrayed her discomfort with what she'd just witnessed. Sir, I'm so sorry about that. Angela can be efficient, she said, stumbling over the diplomatic choice of word. Can I get you that water now? Thank you, Madison, Dominic said, giving her a genuine smile as he read her name tag. That would be great. Madison hurried away and returned quickly with a glass of water on a small linen coaster. Is there anything else I can get for you before we push back? No, this is perfect. I appreciate it, he said. As she walked away, he saw Angela in the galley watching the interaction with a look of undisguised annoyance. She said something to Madison too low for Dominic to hear, but Madison's shoulders slumped as she turned back to her duties. Dominic took a slow sip of water and thought back to another flight 20 years ago when he was a young lieutenant in the Air Force. He'd been in uniform traveling to a new posting and had experienced similar treatment from a gate agent who seemed convinced his ticket was fake. His commanding officer had witnessed the entire exchange and had torn the agent apart with quiet surgical precision. Lieutenant Foster has earned not just that seat, but your respect, the officer had said. But there had been another incident just 5 years ago when Dominic was already a successful aviation consultant. Dressed casually on a weekend flight, he'd been repeatedly asked to verify his business class ticket while white passengers boarded without question. When he'd finally complained, the airline had sent a form apology and discount code. The contrast between those two experiences had shaped his leadership philosophy more than any management book ever could. The flight took off smoothly, a powerful ascent into the darkening sky over the Atlantic. As they reached cruising altitude, the elaborate ritual of first-class service began in earnest. Hot towels were distributed. Angela handed one to Alexandra across the aisle using silver tongs, offering a warm, "Here you are, Mrs. Grant." When she reached Dominic, she dropped the folded towel onto his side table without a word, the tongs clicking loudly against the faux wood surface. Dominic simply picked it up. He was a patient man. Patience had been drilled into him in the cockpit of a cargo plane over hostile territory, where one rash decision could have catastrophic consequences. He knew how to wait for the right moment to act. William Taylor in seat 2B leaned over slightly. "Is it me, or is she a piece of work?" he whispered, nodding discreetly toward Angela. Dominic offered a non-committal shrug. "Long day, maybe," William said, unconvinced. "Or maybe she didn't get the memo that it's 2025. I saw that whole water incident. Unbelievable." The validation from a stranger was noted, another data point logged away. It wasn't just in his head. Dinner service began. Angela took orders from the passengers around Dominic with exaggerated politeness, discussing the wine pairings for the seared scallops and filet mignon. When she arrived at his seat, she didn't present the menu. She simply stood there, pen poised over her notepad. The chicken or the beef, she asked, her tone suggesting he was ordering from a school cafeteria rather than a premium cabin. Dominic looked at her calmly. "I haven't seen a menu yet. Could I please see one?" A flash of irritation crossed her face. "They were handed out earlier. You should have one. I'm afraid I didn't receive one." With an audible sigh, she retrieved a menu from a nearby seat pocket and thrust it at him. "The beef is quite popular," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, as if to suggest he probably couldn't appreciate the nuances of the pan-seared Chilean sea bass. "Thank you," Dominic said, taking his time to read it. "I'll have the sea bass, please. And to start, the lobster bisque. For the wine, could you recommend a Sauvignon Blanc that pairs well with the fish?" Her eyebrows shot up in faint theatrical surprise as if a dog had just recited Shakespeare. Of course, she said the word syrupy, but the tone laced with poison. "I'll see what we have." She returned not with a recommendation, but with a glass already poured. "Here," she said, placing it down with more force than necessary. "This will have to do." Throughout the meal, the pattern continued. His soup was delivered lukewarm. His water glass remained empty while those around him were refilled diligently. When he requested a roll from the bread basket, Angela picked one with tongs and dropped it onto his plate from a height as if she were afraid to get too close. Each action was a small cut, a carefully calibrated insult designed to be just deniable enough. He wasn't being denied service, just the quality of it. He was being managed, tolerated a problem to be contained until landing. A young Indian businessman 2 rows ahead, Rajiv Patel, had been watching the interactions with growing discomfort. When Angela passed his row, he quietly said, "Excuse me, but I noticed the gentleman in 3A hasn't had his water refilled." "Would you mind?" Angela's smile tightened. "I'll get to it when I complete my current service round." She didn't. Dominic noted this intervention with interest. The solidarity was encouraging another passenger, recognizing the unfairness and speaking up. Dominic ate his meal in silence, his mind working. This wasn't just one rude employee. This was a symptom of a deeper problem. How many other passengers in coach or business had been treated this way? How many good employees like Madison were cowed into silence by senior bullies like Angela? This flight was becoming more than just a fact-finding mission. It was becoming a case study in everything wrong with the culture at Skyline Airways. And he, the invisible man in seat 3A, was about to become the judge-jury and ultimately the executioner. After the dinner service, Dominic decided to test the waters again. He pressed his call button. It chimed softly, and the blue light above his seat illuminated. 1 minute passed, then 2. He saw Angela in the galley laughing with the purser. She glanced out, saw the light, and deliberately turned her back. 5 minutes went by. 10. Finally, Madison appeared looking flustered. "Mr. Foster, I'm so sorry for the wait," she said. "It's all right, Madison," he said gently, not wanting to put the nervous young woman on the spot. "Could I please get a blanket and a bottle of water?" "Of course, right away," she said, practically running to the storage compartment. She returned with a sealed plastic bag containing a fresh blanket and a bottle of chilled water. As she handed it to him, Angela emerged from the galley. "Madison, what are you doing?" Angela's voice was sharp, cutting through the cabin's quiet hum. "That passenger already has a blanket." She pointed to the thin, decorative throw that was draped over the seat. "He asked for a proper one," Angela Madison said softly, her face reddening. "And a water. He can use the throw provided, and he had water with dinner," Angela snapped loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. She turned her glare on Dominic. "Sir, we need to conserve supplies for the rest of the passengers." The absurdity of the statement in a half-empty first-class cabin where drinks flowed freely was breathtaking. William Taylor, who had been listening to the exchange, scoffed audibly. "Conserve supplies. There are 8 of us up here. I've had 3 bottles of water and 4 glasses of wine. Are you going to cut me off to conserve for the flight back?" A woman in her 60s. Nancy Chen, from across the aisle, spoke up as well. "I've been flying Skyline for 20 years and I've never heard of rationing blankets in first class." Her tone was mild but carried authority. Angela's face tightened, her professional mask cracking to reveal the raw anger beneath. "I'm simply following protocol, ma'am." "No," Dominic said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "You are not. You are making a distinction." Madison was doing her job correctly. "Please let her continue." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sudden steel in his tone surprised everyone, including Angela. She stared at him, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes before her arrogance reasserted itself. "I am the senior flight attendant in this cabin," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. I decide what protocol is." She turned and stalked back to the galley. Madison looked mortified, placing the water bottle on Dominic's table as if it were a bomb. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Dominic assured her. "You are a credit to this airline." Madison gave him a weak, grateful smile and retreated. For a brief moment, Dominic felt a twinge of doubt. Had he gone too far? Was he creating an uncomfortable situation for everyone just to prove a point? But then he reminded himself this wasn't about him. It was about every passenger who had ever been treated this way without the power to respond. A few minutes later, Madison returned to his seat, her eyes downcast but determined. "Mr. Foster," she said quietly, leaning in slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for me back there." "You were doing your job well," Dominic replied. "That should be recognized, not punished." She hesitated, then continued in a near whisper. "It's not just today. Angela has a pattern with certain passengers, and with staff who don't follow her unwritten rules." "What kind of pattern?" Dominic asked, although he already knew the answer. Madison glanced around nervously. "She's careful. She never says anything that would get her formally written up, but she has her preferences about who deserves the best service and how long has this been going on." Madison bit her lip. "I've only been with Skyline 8 months, but the senior crew says she's been this way for years, ever since she got passed over for purser the 3rd time. She takes it out on passengers she doesn't think belong in first class and on crew members who challenge her. That must make it difficult for newer staff like yourself," Dominic observed. Madison nodded. "My mother was a flight attendant for Continental. She taught me that our job is to make everyone feel welcome and safe. But here, it feels like we're expected to sort people, to judge them." She straightened as another passenger signaled for assistance. "I should go." As she walked away, Dominic reflected on what she'd shared. This wasn't just about him. It was about a culture that allowed someone like Angela to thrive while conscientious employees like Madison lived in fear. 2 rows ahead, Alexandra Grant was engaged in a hushed conversation with her husband. Dominic couldn't hear the words, but he noticed her gesturing subtly toward Angela, then toward him. More witnesses, more data points. He thought back to his first meeting with the Skyline board. They'd been candid about the airline's struggles, but vague about the underlying causes. "We've lost our way," the board chair had admitted. "The numbers are sliding, but it's more than that. It's something in the culture that we can't quite identify." Now Dominic understood. It wasn't a mystery. It was simply that those at the top had never experienced what those at the bottom took for granted. The casual discriminations, the silent judgments, the unofficial hierarchies. These were invisible to executives who were always recognized, always catered to. It was a reality Dominic had navigated his entire career, balancing the need to be twice as good with the determination never to let bias dictate his worth. Now, as he prepared to lead a global airline, he found himself directly confronting it once again. As the night wore on and the cabin lights dimmed, Dominic dozed intermittently, his military training allowing him to rest while maintaining awareness of his surroundings. Around 2 a.m., he woke fully to the sound of hushed voices in the galley. "Just let it go, Angela," a male voice was saying. The purser, Dominic thought. "Did you see how he spoke to me?" Angela's voice was tight with indignation. "These people think they can come in here dressed like they're heading to a basketball game and demand special treatment." "These people?" the purser questioned. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Angela spoke again, her voice defensive. "You know what I mean. The ones who don't belong. The ones who somehow got a seat up here and think it makes them special. Look, I get it. You've been passed over and it's unfair." The purser said, his voice softer now. "But you can't keep taking it out on passengers. This job is hard enough." "Don't lecture me," George, Angela snapped. I've been flying this route since before you got your wings. He's not causing problems for you because you're not a threat. But women like me, we're expected to smile and serve while being replaced by younger models. That's not what this is about, and you know it, George replied. He's not causing any problems. Just get through the flight. I know his type, Angela insisted. They're always looking for something to complain about, always playing the victim. Well, I'm not falling for it. Dominic closed his eyes, letting their words wash over him. There was something almost tragic in Angela's perspective, the way she'd twisted legitimate frustrations about ageism and sexism in her industry into a justification for her own prejudice. She saw herself as the victim while victimizing others. It wasn't the first time he'd been his type to someone like Angela. In his military days, despite his rank and accomplishments, he'd frequently encountered those who saw his skin first and everything else second. As a civilian pilot, and later as an aviation executive, the assumptions had become more subtle but no less present. When he'd started his consulting firm specializing in airline operations, he'd deliberately worn suits to every meeting, knowing that his expertise wouldn't be enough on its own. The memory of a client who had mistaken him for IT support despite his being introduced as the CEO still rankled. Now, as he prepared to take the controls of one of the world's largest airlines, he was experiencing the same prejudice as any other passenger. The irony wasn't lost on him. The next morning, as the cabin lights gradually brightened to simulate dawn, Angela was once again making her rounds with coffee and breakfast options. Dominic observed her interactions with renewed attention. "Good morning, Mr. Taylor," she said warmly to William. "Did you sleep well? We have a lovely egg white frittata this morning, or perhaps the Belgian waffles." William, still groggy, requested the frittata and a strong coffee. When Angela reached Dominic, her demeanor changed completely. No greeting, no smile, just a curt breakfast. "Good morning, Angela," Dominic said pleasantly, using her name deliberately. "I'd like the frittata as well, please, and coffee black." She wrote it down without comment and moved on. Minutes later, she returned with a tray that she practically dropped in front of him. The coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup, staining the linen placemat. "Oops," she said without an ounce of sincerity. "Turbulence." The air was perfectly smooth. Dominic dabbed at the spill with his napkin. "No problem. These things happen." His calm response seemed to irritate her further. Throughout the breakfast service, she continued her pattern of minimal interaction with him while being effusive with other passengers. She accidentally bumped his elbow while serving William, not bothering with an apology. She refilled Alexandra's coffee twice while ignoring Dominic's empty cup. William, who had been watching the situation unfold since the previous evening, leaned over again. "I fly this route twice a month," he said in a low voice. "I've never seen service this blatantly unprofessional. You should report her when we land." "Thank you for your concern," Dominic replied. "I intend to address it." Good William nodded, passing him a business card. "William Taylor, Apex Capital. If you need a witness statement, use my contact information. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on the entire airline." "I appreciate that," William, Dominic said, tucking the card into his pocket. Another ally, another piece of evidence. As the flight progressed into its final hours, Dominic noticed Madison making subtle efforts to compensate for Angela's behavior. She offered him magazines, checked if he needed anything when Angela wasn't looking, and gave him apologetic glances when she couldn't intervene. During one such moment when Madison was collecting trash and Angela was occupied with another passenger, Dominic spoke quietly to her. "Madison, how long have you been with Skyline?" "Just 8 months, sir," she replied. "This is my 6th transatlantic rotation." "And what made you want to become a flight attendant?" Her face brightened slightly. "I've always loved travel. And my mother was a flight attendant for 20 years, different airline though. She loved connecting with people, making their journey special. I wanted that too." "Is it what you expected?" A shadow crossed her face. "Some days are better than others. Most of the senior staff are amazing, but—" She trailed off, glancing toward the galley where Angela was preparing for the final service. "But not all of them," Dominic finished for her. Madison nodded slightly. "I almost quit last month," she admitted. "I got assigned to Angela's crew 3 times in a row. She wrote me up twice for protocol violations that weren't in any manual I've ever seen. My supervisor said it would affect my probationary review." "What kept you from quitting?" Dominic asked, genuinely curious. My mom, Madison, replied with a small smile. "She said every industry has its Angelas, and running from one just leads you to another. Better to stand your ground. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Madison agreed. "I just wish I knew how to stand my ground without losing my job." "I understand," Dominic said. "Thank you for doing what you can. I just wish—" She stopped abruptly as Angela emerged from the galley. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" "No, thank you," Dominic replied, matching her professional tone. As Madison moved away, Dominic reflected on their conversation. Here was a young woman with passion for her work being systematically discouraged by a toxic colleague. How many Madisons had Skyline lost over the years because of Angela's? The human cost was incalculable, but soon it would be his responsibility to address it. The flight entered its final phase with London just an hour away. Angela began distributing arrival forms with the same pattern of warm efficiency for some and cold dismissal for others. Dominic accepted his form without comment, but when he requested a pen, Angela responded as if he'd asked for her personal credit card. "We have a limited supply," she said. "You should have brought one. I'm happy to borrow one and return it," he offered reasonably. "I'll see what I can do," she said, walking away without making any effort to find one. It was Madison who silently slipped him a pen a few minutes later with a small, conspiratorial smile. This ongoing pattern of behavior was building toward something. Dominic could feel it. The tension in the cabin was palpable, with several passengers now openly watching the dynamic between him and Angela. It was no longer subtle. It was a spectacle of prejudice playing out at 35,000 feet. As the plane began its initial descent toward London, the true test of Angela Wilson's professionalism and humanity was about to come in an unexpected form. A small commotion erupted from the row behind William and Dominic. Alexandra Grant, the fashion executive with the understated diamonds, was in distress. Her face was flushed and she was breathing in shallow, raspy gasps. Her husband was frantically pressing the call button. "She's having a reaction," he called out urgently. "I think it was the nuts in the dessert. She's allergic." Angela and Madison rushed to the scene. Angela immediately took charge, but her composure was gone, replaced by a flustered panic. Okay, everyone stay calm," she said, her voice high and unsteady. "Does she have an EpiPen?" "Yes, but she's so disoriented. I don't know if I can." Mr. Grant stammered, his hands shaking visibly as he fumbled with his wife's purse. "We need to page for a doctor on board," Angela announced loudly, moving to grab the intercom. Dominic, who had unbuckled his seatbelt and was now standing calmly in the aisle, spoke with the unhurried clarity of someone trained in crisis management. "Paging for a doctor is a good idea, but it will take time. The immediate priority is to administer the EpiPen. Her airway is closing." He looked at Mr. Grant. "Sir, give the pen to the flight attendant." Angela whirled around her face a mask of fury. "Sir, this is a medical emergency. You need to return to your seat now. You are interfering with the crew. You're panicking," Dominic stated not as an insult, but as a simple observation. "And your panic is delaying treatment." "Madison," he said, shifting his focus to the younger woman, "you know the procedure. Outer thigh. Remove the blue safety cap. Swing and push. Hold it for 3 seconds. You can do this." His calm, direct instructions seemed to break through Madison's own fear. She nodded, took the EpiPen from Mr. Grant, and knelt beside Alexandra. "Mrs. Grant, I'm going to help you," she said, her voice now steady. This will pinch for a moment." Angela looked from Dominic back to the unfolding scene her authority completely usurped. "I did not give you permission to—" "This isn't about your permission," Dominic cut her off, his voice dropping to a low, intense level. "It's about that woman's life. Now you have two choices. You can assist your colleague, or you can get out of the way, but you will stop obstructing." There was a stunned silence broken only by the click and hiss of the EpiPen as Madison administered the injection. Angela stared at Dominic, her mouth agape. In that moment, he was no longer the invisible man in the hoodie. He was someone with power, someone who commanded attention, and she had no idea who he was. It was a disconnect her brain couldn't process, and it terrified her. For a fleeting second, a look almost like shame crossed Angela's face. The realization that her prejudice might have cost someone their life seemed to break through. But the moment passed, quickly replaced by defensive anger. A doctor from the business class cabin soon arrived and took over, commending Madison for her quick action. Mrs. Grant's breathing began to ease, the color returning to her face. The immediate crisis was over. "You did exactly right," the doctor, an older gentleman with a British accent, told Madison. "Another minute of delay could have been serious." He turned to Angela, who was standing uselessly to the side. "Why wasn't the EpiPen administered immediately?" "That's standard protocol for anaphylaxis." Before she could respond, the doctor looked at Dominic. "And you, sir, are you medical personnel?" "No," Dominic replied. "Just someone with emergency management training." "Well, you kept your head. That woman owes you both a debt of gratitude," the doctor said, nodding to Dominic and Madison. Nancy Chen, the older passenger who had spoken up earlier about the blanket, approached and touched Madison's arm. "You were magnificent, dear. So calm under pressure." "Thank you," Madison said, looking surprised by the praise. "I just followed my training. And you," Nancy said, turning to Dominic, "you knew exactly what to do." Dominic smiled modestly. "I've seen this situation before. The main thing is that Mrs. Grant is okay." As the small group dispersed, Angela remained frozen in place, her face pale and drawn. She had failed not just at customer service, but at the most fundamental part of her job, passenger safety. Dominic returned to his seat, the adrenaline slowly receding. He had broken his cover, but it had been necessary. A person's well-being was more important than his experiment. But in doing so, he had exposed something far more dangerous in Angela than just prejudice, incompetence under pressure. For the rest of the flight, Angela avoided him completely. She stayed in the galley, her face pale and drawn. She sent Madison to handle everything in the cabin. The power dynamic had shifted. The fear that had briefly appeared in her eyes had now settled into a deep, gnawing anxiety. She kept stealing glances at him, her mind clearly racing, trying to figure out who he was. An air marshal, an FAA inspector, a lawyer looking for a lawsuit. The thought that he was simply a man who demanded to be treated with basic human dignity didn't seem to cross her mind. Mr. Grant approached Dominic's seat. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said, extending his hand. "Alexandra is feeling much better now, thanks to your quick thinking." "I'm glad to hear it," Dominic replied, shaking his hand. "Madison deserves most of the credit." She kept her composure admirably. "Yes, she did," Mr. Grant agreed. "But if you hadn't stepped in when you did—" He trailed off, the implications clear. "May I ask what you do for a living? You have a real command presence." Dominic felt a moment of internal conflict. Should he reveal his identity? No, that would defeat the purpose of this exercise. "I used to be in the military," he said. "Air Force. Old habits die hard." Mr. Grant nodded appreciatively. "Well, whatever you do now, you saved my wife today. We won't forget it." Madison, on the other hand, had found a new confidence. She checked on Alexandra regularly, ensured Dominic had everything he needed, and even stood up to Angela when she tried to reassert control over the cabin service. "I've got this section covered." Dominic overheard Madison tell Angela firmly when the senior attendant attempted to take over serving pre-landing beverages. It wasn't insubordination, it was professionalism. William Taylor leaned across the aisle again. That was something else, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "The way you took control of that situation. You've done this before, haven't you?" "I've had some experience with emergencies," Dominic acknowledged. "In my former career." "Military," William guessed. Dominic nodded. "Air Force. Transport Division. I thought so. That command presence doesn't come from nowhere." William shook his head. "Between the disgraceful service and that dangerous delay with the EpiPen, I'd say someone's career is about to end." "That's not for me to decide," Dominic said diplomatically. But of course it was precisely for him to decide. In 1 week he would be announced as Skyline's new CEO, with full authority to reshape the airline's culture and workforce. Angela Wilson had no idea that she had just performed a career-ending demonstration for her new boss. As Dominic thought about the decision ahead, he felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was he being too harsh? Would firing someone over a single flight, no matter how egregious the behavior, set the right tone for his leadership? Perhaps a suspension, a demotion, or a last-chance agreement would be more appropriate. He thought about Madison, about how close she had come to quitting, about how many other young, talented employees might have already left. He thought about Alexandra Grant, and how her life had been put at risk by Angela's incompetence and pride. He thought about every passenger who had ever been made to feel unwelcome or unworthy because of someone like Angela. No, he decided. This wasn't about punishment. This was about standards. About drawing a clear line between what was acceptable and what was not. Sometimes, leadership required difficult decisions. As the plane began its final approach to Heathrow, Dominic looked out at the patchwork of fields and the sprawling metropolis coming into view. He had come on this flight seeking information about his new company. He had found something far more valuable: clarity about what needed to change. The familiar bump of the landing gear touching down on the tarmac was a sound of finality. The 8-hour flight, a microcosm of prejudice and failure, was over. As the Boeing 787 taxied toward the terminal, the cabin, which had been fraught with tension, fell into a quiet, anticipatory hush. Angela reappeared from the galley to perform the landing procedures, her movements stiff and robotic. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle defensive shell. She avoided Dominic's gaze entirely, focusing on a fixed point at the back of the cabin as she recited the arrival instructions. Dominic remained in his seat, calmly watching her. He felt a sliver of something that could have been pity, but he quickly dismissed it. Pity was for people who made mistakes. Angela hadn't made a mistake. She had made a series of deliberate choices, each one rooted in a deep-seated ugliness. She had chosen to demean, to ignore, and to obstruct. She had chosen her path. Now she would have to walk it to its conclusion. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The usual flurry of activity began as passengers stood to retrieve their belongings from the overhead compartments. Dominic waited patiently for the aisle to clear slightly. William Taylor stood up and offered a hand. "Dominic Wright, I'm William. Listen, I just want to say what you did back there for Mrs. Grant and the way you handled her," he said, gesturing with his head toward Angela, was impressive. "Truly. Just trying to make sure everyone has a safe flight," Dominic replied with a small smile. "Well, if you ever need a witness for your complaint, and I hope you file one, here's my card." William pressed his business card into Dominic's hand. "I fly this route twice a month. That woman is a menace and a liability." "Thank you, William. I appreciate that. More than you know," Dominic said, tucking the card into his pocket. As the line of deplaning passengers began to move, Dominic saw his moment. He stood and deliberately positioned himself in the aisle to be near the exit where Angela and George the purser were bidding the passengers farewell with plastic smiles. "Goodbye, Mr. Taylor." "Thank you for flying, Skyline," George said warmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Grant." "I hope you're feeling much better," Angela said, her voice oozing a fraudulent concern that made Dominic's stomach turn. When Dominic reached her, he stopped. He looked her directly in the eye. "Miss Wilson." He began, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "I'll need your full name and your employee ID number." Angela's smile vanished. Her face, already pale, lost another shade of color. She thought he was just another disgruntled passenger, but his tone held a gravity that rattled her. Still, her defenses were up. "Sir, if you have a complaint, you can file it with customer service in the terminal or on our website," she said, trying to dismiss him with practiced corporate deflection. "I'm not filing a complaint with customer service," Dominic said, his gaze unwavering. "I am making a formal report to corporate management. I need your name and employee number for that report. You can give them to me now, or I can have security pull them from the flight manifest. The choice is yours, but I assure you the result will be the same." George, sensing the tension, took a half step forward. "Sir, perhaps I can help resolve this situation. I'm the purser for this flight." "This isn't about resolving a situation," Dominic interrupted without looking away from Angela. "This is about accountability for a pattern of discriminatory service and a critical safety lapse. The threat of involving security." The cold certainty in his voice finally broke through Angela's bravado. She saw the purser and other crew members looking on, their curiosity piqued. Her humiliation was mounting. Defeated, she snatched a napkin and a pen from the galley counter. She scribbled down the information, her handwriting sharp and angry. "Angela L. Wilson, ID 63B429, she muttered, shoving the napkin into his hand. "There. Are you satisfied?" For a moment, just the briefest flash, Dominic considered letting it go. He saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation of someone who knew their career was hanging by a thread. He thought about his own rise through the ranks, the mentors who had given him second chances, the value of redemption. But then he remembered Madison's near resignation, Alexandra's life-threatening emergency, the passengers who had witnessed Angela's prejudice and said nothing until he spoke up. This wasn't about one woman's career. It was about an entire airline's culture. "For now," Dominic said, taking the napkin and folding it neatly. "Thank you for your cooperation." He turned and walked down the jet bridge without a backward glance. He could feel her eyes burning into his back, a mixture of hatred, fear, and utter confusion. She had no idea that the napkin she had just handed over was not for a customer complaint form, but for her own professional obituary. She believed she had dealt with a difficult passenger. The reality was so much worse. She had just handed a confession to her new boss. Dominic walked through the sprawling terminal of Heathrow, his pace unhurried. He bypassed the signs for baggage claim and customs. He wasn't connecting to another flight. He wasn't heading into London for meetings. His destination was a sterile glass and steel office building just a short walk from the terminal Skyline Airways European headquarters. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Sophia, it's Dominic. I've just landed at Heathrow." "Welcome to London, Sophia Rivera," the global head of human resources replied. "How was your flight, Illuminating?" he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a positive assessment. "I need you to set up a meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Conference room 3. I want you the head of UK operations and the senior VP of in-flight services. And Sophia, I need you to get the full service and disciplinary file for a flight attendant. Name is Angela Wilson, ID 63B429. Have it on the table along with the preliminary flight report from SL350. He paused, then added, I also want you to contact a passenger named William Taylor from Apex Capital. He was in seat 2B. Tell him the CEO of Skyline Airways would be grateful for a written statement about his experience. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sofia Rivera, the formidable head of human resources who had been with the company for 25 years, finally spoke. "Dominic, what happened on that flight?" Dominic stopped walking, his expression grim. "A display of everything that's wrong with this airline. Casual discrimination, blatant disregard for service standards, and worst of all, a dangerous delay in medical response due to ego and incompetence." "That sounds substantial," Sofia said carefully. "It was eye-opening. I went in looking for operational inefficiencies. Instead, I found a cultural rot that needs immediate attention. I'll have everything ready for tomorrow's meeting," Sofia promised. "And Dominic, I'm sorry your first experience with Skyline was so negative." "Don't be," he replied. "It showed me exactly what I need to know to do this job right." He ended the call, the napkin with Angela's name clutched in his hand. He had arrived in London not just as a CEO, but as an agent of change. A storm was coming for Skyline Airways, and Angela Wilson was standing at its epicenter. As he walked toward the airport exit, he spotted a familiar figure, Alexandra Grant, the passenger, who had suffered the allergic reaction. She was sitting in a wheelchair while her husband spoke with a ground staff member. Though she looked tired, her color had returned to normal. Dominic approached them. "Mrs. Grant, I'm glad to see you're doing better." She looked up at him with recognition and gratitude. "You're the gentleman who helped during my episode. The doctor said your quick thinking made all the difference." She extended her hand. "Thank you. Truly." Dominic shook her hand. "I'm just glad you're all right. Is everything being taken care of?" Mr. Grant nodded. "The airline is arranging for a medical escort to our hotel. We'll follow up with a local doctor there." "Good," Dominic said. Then after a moment's consideration, he pulled out one of his personal cards. Not his new Skyline CEO cards, which hadn't been printed yet, but a plain one with just his name and contact information. "If you need anything at all during your stay in London, please don't hesitate to call. I have some connections that might be helpful." Mrs. Grant accepted the card with a smile. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Foster." "Safe travels," Dominic said, and continued on his way. Outside the terminal, he took a deep breath of the cool London air. The Skyline Airways headquarters loomed in the distance, a gleaming tower of glass and steel. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, Conference Room 3 on the executive floor of Skyline Airways Heathrow headquarters was buzzing with a nervous energy. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and apprehension. Seated around the polished mahogany table were the highest-ranking officials in the airline's European operations, Sofia Rivera, the global head of HR who had flown in overnight from New York, Victor Newman, the dapper head of UK operations, and a visibly sweating man named James Alvarez, the senior vice president of in-flight services. On the table in front of each of them was a thick binder. Dominic Foster walked in at precisely 900 a.m. He was no longer the man in the hoodie. Today he wore a bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark blue tie. The transformation was so complete that James Alvarez, who had never met him in person, did a slight double-take. Dominic's presence filled the room, his quiet intensity more commanding than any loud declaration could ever be. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said, his voice even. "Thank you for being here on such short notice. We will dispense with the pleasantries. We have a serious problem." He gestured to the binders. "Before you is the complete service record of Senior Flight Attendant Angela Wilson, employee ID 63B429. You will also find my own preliminary report from Flight SL350 yesterday, and a sworn emailed statement from a Mr. William Taylor, a senior partner at Apex Capital and a platinum-tier frequent flyer who witnessed the events. The executives opened their binders. The silence in the room was broken only by the rustling of paper. For 10 minutes, Dominic said nothing, letting them read. He watched their faces. Sofia Rivera's expression was grim but unsurprised. Victor Newman looked increasingly disturbed. James Alvarez, the man directly responsible for the conduct of all flight attendants, looked like he was about to be physically ill. The file on Angela Wilson was damning. It was a mosaic of mediocrity and malice painted over 2 decades. There were dozens of minor complaints, nearly all from minority passengers citing her curt-toned dismissiveness or poor attitude. Each one had been resolved with a form letter and a voucher for a few thousand air miles. She had been passed over for a purser position 3 times due to poor interpersonal skills, a fact that was noted in her reviews alongside observations of her simmering resentment. She did the bare minimum to remain employed, her long tenure and union protections acting as a shield. What was most troubling, however, were the notes in the margins of several evaluations. Concerns raised by junior staff about treatment read one. Possible favoritism issues noted another. These red flags had been documented but never addressed, filing away problems rather than solving them. Then they got to Dominic's report. It was a meticulously detailed, time-stamped account of the flight written with the detached precision of a pilot logging an incident. He listed every ignored request, every condescending remark, every safety protocol violated during the medical emergency. He didn't use inflammatory words like racism. He didn't have to. He just laid out the facts, her disparate treatment of him versus other passengers, her refusal of a basic amenity, her dangerous panic during the allergic reaction, her insubordination in the face of a clear and present danger to a passenger. William Taylor's statement corroborated everything, his business-like prose adding a layer of irrefutable third-party credibility. He concluded his statement with a chilling sentence. In my 15 years of flying first class for business, I have never witnessed a more unprofessional, prejudiced, and frankly dangerous employee. I was reconsidering my firm's multi-million-dollar corporate account with Skyline until Mr. Foster's team reached out and assured me this would be handled at the highest level. There was also a brief statement from Alexandra Grant confirming that there had been a significant delay in administering her EpiPen due to what she termed apparent confusion among the crew. James Alvarez finally looked up, his face ashen. I had no idea. These minor complaints, they never reached my desk. They're handled by a junior resolution team. And that James is the core of the problem, Dominic said, his voice dangerously soft. A pattern of behavior was allowed to fester for years because no one was looking at the whole picture. We have a system that treats each incident as an isolated event, rewarding bullies and senior slackers while crushing the morale of good young employees like Madison Lopez, the junior attendant who actually did her job. He leaned forward. During the medical incident, Miss Wilson froze. She was a liability. Her first instinct was not to render aid, but to assert her own fragile authority. Had that passenger's condition been more severe, had Madison not acted, we could be looking at a wrongful death lawsuit instead of a personnel review. This isn't just about a rude flight attendant. This is about a fundamental failure of oversight training and culture that starts right here in this room. He let that sink in, his gaze moving from James to Victor and finally to Sofia. So here is what is going to happen. Dominic continued, his tone shifting from analytical to commanding. Sofia, I want Ms. Wilson's flight privileges revoked immediately. She is to be grounded pending a formal disciplinary hearing. I want her scheduled for that hearing at the earliest possible time, which I believe is 48 hours from notification per the union agreement. Sofia nodded, already making a note. Consider it done. James Dominic said, turning to the VP of In-Flight Services, your department is broken. You are going to conduct a full top-to-bottom audit of the complaint resolution process. I want to know how many other Angela Wilsons we have on our payroll. I want a new system in place within 90 days that flags employees with recurring complaints, especially those with racial or discriminatory undertones. That system will be your personal responsibility." James could only nod, furiously scribbling notes. "Victor, you're going to handle the passenger-facing side. I want you to personally call Mrs. Grant and her husband. Waive the cost of their entire trip upgrade, their status to our highest tier for life, and offer them a personal apology on behalf of the airline. I also want you to identify the doctor who assisted and provide him with a similar gesture of our gratitude. As for William Taylor, I will handle him myself." Victor raised his hand tentatively. "May I offer a counterpoint, Dominic? Not about the compensation, which I fully support, but about the handling of Ms. Wilson." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. I'm concerned that an immediate termination might send a message that we don't believe in second chances or rehabilitation. Perhaps a final warning with mandatory sensitivity training and a demotion would—" "Let me be clear." Dominic interrupted his tone, level but firm. "This isn't about a single incident. This is about a 2-decade pattern of behavior that has put passengers at risk and driven good employees away. The evidence before us shows that Angela Wilson has had numerous second chances and has chosen not to take them. My decision isn't final yet. I want to hear her side at the hearing, but I am not inclined toward leniency in this case." Victor nodded, accepting the rebuke with professional grace. Finally, Dominic looked at the entire table. "I want you to find Madison Lopez, the junior attendant. I want to see her file. If she is as good as she appeared to be, I want her on the fast track for promotion. We are going to start rewarding competence and integrity, and we are going to start making examples of those who lack it." The message was clear. This wasn't just about firing one person. This was the beginning of a revolution at Skyline Airways. Dominic Foster's quiet secret flight had ended. Dominic Foster, the CEO, had just taken control of the cockpit. "I have one question, if I may," Victor said, his British accent clipped with tension. "When will your appointment be announced publicly?" "Currently, only the board and a few senior executives know." "The official announcement is scheduled for Monday," Dominic replied. "But that timeline may need to be accelerated depending on how this situation develops. I want Angela Wilson to understand exactly who she was dealing with on that flight." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, the union may push back on such a rapid disciplinary process. They typically prefer a more graduated approach." Dominic's gaze hardened slightly. "James, let me be perfectly clear. This isn't about a customer service lapse. This is about a safety violation. When Ms. Wilson delayed medical care to Mrs. Grant and attempted to obstruct assistance, she crossed a line that no union contract can defend. But by all means, let them try. I'm prepared to make this my first public stand as CEO." The three executives exchanged glances. There was no mistaking the resolve in Dominic's voice. This wasn't going to be business as usual. For Angela Wilson, the 48 hours after landing in London were a spiral of anxiety and self-delusion. She replayed the flight over and over in her mind, her anger warring with a growing sense of dread. The man in the hoodie, who was he? She'd run his name Foster through the company's internal database of high-value clients and FAA officials. Nothing. He was a nobody, a ghost. Her anger began to solidify into a narrative of victimhood. He was an agitator, an opportunist looking for a payout. He had provoked her, undermined her authority in front of passengers, and created a hostile work environment. She was the one who was wronged. She complained bitterly to her union representative, a jaded man named Luis Ortega, who listened with half an ear and promised to look into it. When the official email arrived, her heart plummeted. Formal notice of disciplinary hearing. She was to report to the Heathrow corporate offices in 2 days. The email also informed her she was being placed on paid administrative leave effective immediately. Grounded. The word felt like a prison sentence. In 22 years of flying, she had never been grounded. She called Luis again, her voice hysterical. "They're trying to fire me over one entitled passenger who didn't get his blanket fast enough. This is a witch hunt." Luis, now paying closer attention, reviewed the notice. "Calm down, Angela. They can't fire you for something so flimsy. It's probably just a formality. A slap on the wrist to appease the guy. You have seniority, a long record. We'll fight it. Just go in there, stick to your story. Say he was aggressive and you felt threatened. We'll paint him as the problem." Bolstered by Luis's misguided confidence, Angela began to rebuild her shattered arrogance. He was right. She was a veteran. The airline needed her. This upstart in a hoodie wouldn't get the better of her. She would go into that meeting, apologize for any misunderstanding, and be back in the air by next week. Yet in quiet moments alone in her London flat, doubts crept in. The look on Madison's face when Angela had berated her for helping Dominic, the expressions of the passengers who had witnessed her behavior, the doctor's question about the delayed EpiPen. For a brief instant, Angela wondered if she had gone too far this time. She remembered her early years at Skyline, how much she had loved the job, the genuine pleasure she had taken in making passengers comfortable. When had that changed? When had service become a weapon rather than a calling? But these moments of self-awareness were fleeting, quickly buried under layers of self-justification and entitlement. By Wednesday evening, she had convinced herself once again that she was the victim, that her actions had been justified, and that the hearing was merely a formality. As Thursday morning dawned, Angela Wilson dressed in her immaculate uniform. It was her armor, a symbol of the status and authority she felt had been challenged. She met her union rep Luis Ortega in the lobby of Skyline's corporate headquarters. Luis gave her a confident wink. "Don't worry, we've got this. Just a couple of HR paper pushers. We'll be out in an hour." They were escorted to conference room 3. Angela walked in, her head held high, ready for battle. And then she saw him. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, dressed in a suit that cost more than her car, was the man from seat 3A, the man in the hoodie. Beside him sat Sofia Rivera and James Alvarez. The air rushed out of Angela's lungs. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. This was impossible. It had to be a mistake, a nightmare. "Mr. Foster," she stammered, looking at him with dawning, sickening horror. What are you doing here?" Dominic Foster looked at her, his expression unreadable, a slate of calm executive authority. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stated a fact. "I'm here, Miss Wilson," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "because as of last Monday, I am the Chief Executive Officer of Skyline Airways, and you and I need to have a conversation about the kind of company Skyline is going to be from now on. Please have a seat." Luis, the union rep, froze mid-stride, his jaw slack, his confident demeanor evaporating like mist. Angela's legs felt weak, and she stumbled into the chair offered to her. The armor of her uniform suddenly felt like a cheap costume. The room wasn't a hearing room. It was an execution chamber, and she had just realized she wasn't the plaintiff. She was the condemned. The silence in conference room 3 was absolute. Angela Wilson stared at Dominic Foster, her mind a frantic screaming void. CEO. The word reverberated in her skull, shattering every assumption, every justification she had built up over the past 2 days. The man she had dismissed, insulted, and endangered was not just a passenger. He was the most powerful person in the entire company. "Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Ortega. I was not misrepresenting myself," Dominic said firmly. "I was a paying customer in first class. Does Skyline Airways have a policy that the level of service safety and basic human decency a passenger receives is dependent on their job title?" Are your flight attendants trained to be courteous only to people they believe are important? The question hung in the air, a perfect trap. Luis opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no good answer. As for entrapment, Dominic continued, I did not ask Ms. Wilson to be rude. I did not ask her to ignore my call light. I didn't ask her to lie about conserving supplies, and I certainly didn't ask her to panic and interfere with the rendering of medical aid to a passenger in anaphylactic shock. Those were all choices she made. He methodically went through the timeline, his voice never rising, but each word landing like a hammer blow. You denied me a pre-departure beverage, a standard service in that cabin. You treated me differently than the passengers around me. You ignored a direct request for a comfort item and then publicly berated a junior colleague for providing it. Each of these is a violation of Skyline Airways' service standards. They are grounds for a written warning. He flipped a page in his own binder. But then we come to the medical incident. Your actions. Miss Wilson constituted a grave safety violation. You failed to maintain composure. You attempted to obstruct another crew member from providing critical aid, and you directly contravened your emergency response training. According to Purser Maxwell's report, your panic caused a critical 30-second delay in the administration of the EpiPen. In Mrs. Grant's condition, 30 seconds could have been the difference between life and death. James Alvarez finally spoke up, his voice grim. Angela, the FAA has strict regulations about interfering with a crew member's duties, especially during an emergency. What Mr. Foster is describing is in itself a fireable offense. This is a lie, Angela shrieked, her composure finally shattering. I was in control. That young girl, Madison, she was hysterical. And the passenger, he was aggressive. He was shouting. He got out of his seat. He threatened me. Your version of events. Ms. Wilson is not supported by a single witness, Sophia said softly. In fact, every single person we spoke to contradicts it. For a brief moment, something like realization dawned in Angela's eyes. Her defenses were crumbling, exposing the truth even to herself. She had been wrong, terribly catastrophically wrong. But the moment passed quickly, buried under the avalanche of her pride. The walls were closing in. Every lie was being exposed, every defense dismantled. Angela looked wildly around the room, her eyes landing on Dominic. The hate she felt for him was a physical thing, a burning acid in her throat. You did this, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. You set me up, all of this just because you have a chip on your shoulder. Because you think everyone's a racist. Dominic met her gaze, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It was not anger, but a profound weariness. No, Miss Wilson. I didn't think everyone was a racist. But on that flight you were. Your prejudice was the foundation for everything that followed. You judged me the second I walked onto that plane. You decided I didn't belong, and you treated me accordingly. Your racism made you unprofessional. Your unprofessionalism made you a liability. And that liability is something this airline can no longer afford. He stood up, signaling the end of the hearing. The decision has been made. Angela L. Wilson. Sophia Rivera said, her voice formal and final. Effective immediately, your employment with Skyline Airways is terminated for cause, specifically for gross misconduct, endangerment of a passenger, and repeated violations of company service and safety protocols. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Security will now escort you from the premises. Termination for cause. The words hit Angela like a physical blow. It meant no severance, no retirement package she could cash out, no positive reference. 22 years of her life erased. She was being thrown away like garbage. 2 security guards entered the room. Angela didn't move. She just stared at Dominic, her face a twisted mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. This couldn't be happening. You will regret this, she seethed. You'll run this company into the ground. Dominic simply turned his back on her, a final dismissive gesture that was more powerful than any insult. He walked to the window and looked out at the airfield at the planes taking off and landing. The guards gently took Angela by the arm. As they led her from the room, her career over her life in ruins, she finally understood. He hadn't set her up. He had simply given her the rope, and she had, with her own 2 hands, tied the noose and kicked away the chair. The karma was not a lightning bolt from the heavens. It was the slow, inevitable consequence of 1,000 ugly choices she alone had made. The following morning, the business news was dominated by a single headline. Skyline Airways names former Air Force pilot Dominic Foster as new CEO. The announcement, originally scheduled for the following Monday, had been moved up in light of the rapidly circulating rumors about a high-profile termination at the London office. First, Madison, I want to thank you for your professionalism during flight. SL 350, Dominic began. Your actions, especially during Mrs. Grant's medical emergency, exemplified the highest standards of Skyline Airways. Madison blushed slightly. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Dominic corrected gently. You were doing more than your job. You were showing courage and compassion in a difficult situation. You were demonstrating what this airline should stand for. He slid a folder across the table to her. I've reviewed your file. 8 months with the company, consistently positive evaluations, though I notice you've never been put forward for any advanced training or leadership roles. Madison shifted uncomfortably. Angela Ms. Wilson, she had a lot of influence over who got those opportunities, and she made sure you didn't. Dominic concluded. That changes today. He opened the folder. I'm offering you a position in our cabin leadership development program. It's typically reserved for attendants with at least 5 years of experience, but I'm making an exception in your case. The program will prepare you for a senior cabin position within 18 months. Madison's eyes widened. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Dominic smiled. And then help me change this airline. Yes, Madison said without hesitation, a smile breaking across her face. Absolutely yes. The firing of Angela Wilson was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. It became a quiet legend within Skyline Airways, a cautionary tale whispered in galleys and break rooms from London to Los Angeles. It sent a shockwave through the company. The old ways were over. Seniority was no longer a shield for incompetence or prejudice. 1 year after flight, SL 350 Skyline Airways held its annual leadership conference at the company's headquarters in Chicago. The atmosphere was electric, the mood celebratory. The numbers told a compelling story. Customer satisfaction scores had risen by 22%. Employee turnover had dropped by 31%, and market share had increased for the first time in 5 years. But perhaps the most significant change wasn't reflected in any metric. It was in the faces of the employees gathering in the grand ballroom, more diverse, more energized, more confident than ever before. Among them was Madison Lopez, now a newly minted cabin service director, the youngest in the company's history. As Dominic Foster took the stage for his keynote address, the room fell silent. Gone was the hoodie. Gone was the casual anonymity. Today he wore a sharp suit with a skyline blue tie, every inch the successful CEO. But his opening words reminded everyone of where the journey had begun. 1 year ago, I sat in seat 3A. He began watching how our airline treated someone they thought didn't matter. Today, I stand before you because that experience changed everything. Not just for me, not just for the passenger in that seat, but for our entire organization. He paced the stage, his energy infectious. We've accomplished more in 12 months than most companies do in 5 years. We've retrained over 15,000 employees. We've promoted 476 people based purely on merit and performance. We've implemented the industry's most advanced customer feedback system. And most importantly, we've created a culture where dignity isn't just a buzzword in our mission statement, it's the standard by which we measure every interaction, every decision, every policy. As the presentation concluded, Dominic invited Madison to join him on stage. The young woman who had once trembled under Angela Wilson's glare now moved with quiet confidence, her achievements speaking for themselves. "Madison represents the future of Skyline Airways," Dominic said, a note of pride in his voice. "Not because I singled her out, but because she singled herself out through her actions, her integrity, and her unwavering commitment to doing what's right, even when it was difficult." Madison stepped to the microphone, initially nervous, but quickly finding her stride. "A year ago, I was afraid to speak up when I saw something wrong," she admitted. "I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of making waves. What I've learned since then is that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite that fear. And in a company that values courage, that fear gets smaller every day." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Madison. It was for the cultural transformation she embodied. The next morning, as Dominic boarded a Skyline flight back to New York, he was greeted by name by every crew member, not because he was the CEO, but because they had made it their business to know every passenger. He settled into seat 3A, now a personal tradition, and watched the precise, respectful, genuinely warm service unfold around him. When the young flight attendant offered him pre-departure water with a sincere smile, Dominic was reminded of the profound truth that had guided his leadership from the beginning. Dignity wasn't a luxury to be earned through status or appearance. It was the fundamental right of every person who chose to fly Skyline Airways. As the plane lifted off, soaring into the clear blue sky, Dominic knew with absolute certainty that the airline under his command was finally living up to its name, rising above its troubled past to reach new heights of excellence. One passenger, one flight, one moment of human connection at a time. The transformation wasn't just about policies or procedures or even profits. It was about proving that treating people with respect wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business. And in that simple truth lay the secret to Skyline's renaissance and Dominic Foster's enduring legacy. So there you have it. A story that started with a simple glass of water and ended with the complete transformation of a billion-dollar airline. It serves as a powerful reminder that the person you dismiss today could be the person who holds your entire future in their hands tomorrow. But Dominic Foster's story isn't just about karma or comeuppance. It's about responsibility. He didn't just punish one person. He used the incident as a catalyst to fix a broken system to reward good people like Madison and to build a culture of respect from the cockpit to the cabin. It proves that true leadership isn't about asserting authority, but about upholding a standard of dignity for everyone. If this story of ultimate karma and transformative leadership resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support for accountability. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that character always matters more than position. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories, where justice isn't just a dream, it's a destination. Let us know in the comments below, what would you have done in Dominic's position?